Hi guys, welcome back to episode 8. I'm Serena.
I'm Ellen.
I'm Shanti.
And I'm Sharvi.
And today we'll be talking about HeLa cells.
HeLa Cells are named after Henrietta Lacks, who was a Black 31-year-old woman. She came into Johns Hopkins Hospital because of her irregular vaginal bleeding and was treated for cervical cancer. From there, doctors took some of the cervical cancer cells from her tumor, and they were taken in the year of 1951, which were taken without her knowledge. George Otto J., a cell biologist, found they could be kept alive and developed the cell line. A typical cell taken from human cells would survive only a few days, but what was abnormal was that the cells from Lacks' tumor behaved differently.
Yeah, so adding on, she had to go to the Johns Hopkins Hospital because it's the only one in the area that actually treated Black patients at the time. And even then, she was located into a racially segregated wing of the hospital where the treatments weren't as, up to date. And,
So this is similar to another case that's called the Tuskegee-Syphilis experiment, and they're often discussed alongside each other. And the initial goal for that was to observe the progression of untreated syphilis in 399 Black men to document. And the doctors told them that they had quote unquote bad blood, and then the doctors kept them in there without properly testing them or giving them proper treatment. And it raises a lot of discussion about racial segregation in medicine. And I think that's really evil, and I'm glad there's
So, like Serena said, there was a lot of racial segregation around this time, thinking about how it was in 1951. But then one of the specific reasons why Henrietta's cells were kept was because of the fact that they were immortal. And there's a reason why they're immortal, and that was because they have an overactive version of the enzyme telomerase. So basically, the chromosomes in a cell have these little caps at the ends of the chromosomes called telomeres. And usually, after a cell replicates, the telomeres kind of shorten. So that slowly causes the cell to die. But because these HeLa cells had an overactive version of the enzyme telomerase, they were able to have immortality, and then they were able to proliferate really easily. And it was even said that HeLa cells were so aggressive that they could literally grow on a doorknob. So they were really aggressive, yeah.
This is basically connected to the story and connected to Henrietta Lacks' story because after rounds of collected tissue samples, when she arrived at the hospital, a doctor uncultured the cells from her cervix and observed that the cells grew fast and even doubled every 20 to 24 hours, which is very abnormal behavior. And they didn't even die out. Even though Lacks nor her family consented to harvesting cells, the doctors gave out her cells to any scientist requesting them for the sake of scientific research. Even later that year, Henrietta Lacks died of cervical cancer in October of 1951. These cells are considered immortal and very amazing and a discovery in medicine as they can divide an unlimited number of times as long as the fundamental cell survival conditions are met. Basically, the definition of the human cell line is that the human cell line established from a cervical adenocarcinoma, which has been widely distributed and used in research, but also been subject to cross-contamination and misidentification, resulting in numerous derivatives that are often incorrectly labeled in scientific literature.
Oh, wait, yeah,
So,
Ellen, that's kind of what I was saying about how aggressive they are. HeLa cells literally can jump into different dishes or can cross-contaminate other cell lines because they're so powerful.
yeah, so, like we were talking about, her cells were taken, without her consent, which raised a whole debate about, patient, rights and, knowledge and consent. And as well as that, she also died later that year because her family and herself didn't receive financial compensation or adequate health care, even though she was like basically the one who kind of started this whole discovery that would like power the biomedical field for so many years later.
So the ethics, I can add on a little bit more about that. I think the main discussion is that they were taken without her knowledge or consent, which is common around the time, but it's considered unethical today because of like the practices like HIPAA and like all of the other things. And her cells are commercialized and distributed worldwide, but her family didn't receive any compensation. So that's another big argument. And her story definitely highlights how like Black patients are exploited in medicine, and it like raises questions about fairness and racism. And also because her cells contain her genetic information, like there can be some issues that like
Wait, yeah, I get what you're
there can be
saying.
some
Like their genetic makeup is like online, and anyone can find their like genetic code. That's really dangerous.
Exactly. And then like if like there's like hereditary diseases and stuff like that, so then people, since her like DNA is like worldwide, like anyone can access that kind of stuff, so it's definitely dangerous for their ancestors or their descendants. Yeah, Shanti?
Adding on, like you just mentioned quickly, it basically introduced the need for patient privacy, which led to the passage of the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act in 1996, which basically protects like every patient from like having other people access their medical records or DNA, and like it like protects their privacy, which is super, super important because then anyone can access your medical information.
And I also feel like what adds to kind of the unfairness of this incident was that Henrietta was like a poor Black farmer, and she was a mother of 5 kids, so her death was really tragic, and like she died and was placed in an unmarked grave too. And then after that, her cells were harvested and used, and a lot of researchers made so much money off of her cells, and like still her family was left super poor and they could barely afford healthcare. So it's a pretty unfair like situation.
Also, I want to say that like since this has happened, there's been like a lot of discussion which even reached the Supreme Court. So then there was a Supreme Court case called Moore versus Regents of the University of California in 1990, and this court decided that patients do not have property rights over their discarded tissues, even those tissues that lead to profitable medical products. So I guess that like ended the debate over whether she got to keep those, like whether all those cells that are distributed worldwide technically belong to her family and whether they get compensated. So I guess that kind of ends the discussions.
Mm-hmm.
That wraps up our episode today about HeLa Cells. I'm Ellen.
I'm Serena.
I'm Shanti.
And I'm Sharvi.
Just a quick disclaimer, this podcast was researched and produced entirely by high school students, so everything might not be entirely correct. Thank you for listening.